All right, welcome back, everybody, again to the Independent Voter Podcast. I'm joined here from my we spread across the country. We got Cara on the East Coast, Sean in the middle, and then we're sitting here in studio in San Diego. You know, as always, a lot going on, and you see the partisan narratives really like pulling us apart. I know we have some things we do want to cover today. We just did a very, very large poll in California, exclusively registered NPPs. You know, we can go into all the methodology and stuff, but like we know these are 1,700 NPPs that turn out to vote. Very interesting results. I know Cara's got a list of items to cover. Sean's been writing some really good stories of the shenanigans of the Republican Party in Missouri. That's for all the listeners and the emails we get saying, "Oh, we're picking on you guys must be Republicans. You've been picking on Democrats too much." I mean, welcome to the life of independent voter. Depending on what podcast or what article you read or whatever it is, then the assumptions come in, the attacks come in, and but it is what it is. We're still doing what we're doing. What do you guys got on the docket? What do you got, Cara?
Well, of course, we want to talk about the California poll, which is a huge poll, and NPP stands for what again, Chad?
In California, we call it no party preference. For those of you who are wonks, there's actually a history behind that. I'm going to boil this down as fast as possible so people don't fall asleep and stop listening, right? But most simply, in like a normal state, you have closed or open primaries. When you affiliate with a political party, so I'm a Republican voter, so I can vote in the Republican primary. California, when we created nonpartisan primaries, the term is no party preference, because in California, you actually do not join the party technically when you register to vote. You register a preference, and that has to do with the legal consequences of who owns the primaries. And for whatever folks say, the fact is California is one of the only states where the voters own the primaries, not the political parties. So
There's a bunch of lucky ducks. So we're going to talk about California. We'll talk about Missouri and the Secretary of State there getting into some hanky-panky with some ballot language. We're going to talk about a little bit about West Virginia. And
that's a good word, hanky-panky.
Yeah, I haven't heard that one in a while.
I love it. I like hanky-panky.
Yeah.
All right. Sorry, Cara.
Describes it well.
Thank you. And then we're going to talk about a little bit about West Virginia and what's happening there with the Republican Party trying to close the primary and what Joe Manchin has to say about that. We're going to talk a little bit about Nevada. We're going to talk about Alaska. Mary Peltola just got into the U.S. Senate race there in the top 4 primary, and about a special election in Santa Clara County. Lot on the docket today. So let's get into it.
All right. What's on first? Well, we were going to talk about the Missouri first, right? That the shenanigans is like, okay, in California we had our Prop 50 where we got voters to basically support short-term gerrymandering, I'd call it. But I mean, the ballot language was so ridiculous for anybody who's not really paying attention. You read it and you feel like it's the anti-gerrymandering. I mean, just to show how both parties do the same thing. I mean, Sean, you wrote a good article. Like, just explain what they did in Missouri.
Yeah,
and he admits it in court. So
yeah, he admits this in court. And it's Secretary of State Denny Hoskins, the Republican Secretary of State in Missouri, admitted in court. His lawyer admitted on his behalf in court that the language that they use for a veto referendum that is targeting a gerrymandered map passed under HB1 in September in Missouri, that the language used for the ballot summary was prejudicial. They admitted this.
What was the language?
No, okay. So I actually need to read this. I don't have it memorized, but so basically it asks voters if they support HB1 or they approve of HB1, which, according to language, repeals Missouri's existing gerrymandered congressional plan that protects incumbent politicians and replaces it with new congressional boundaries that keep more cities and counties intact, are more compact, and better reflect the statewide voting patterns, which is not what HB1 actually does. What HB1 does is that it carves up Kansas City to give the Republicans 1 additional safe seat. So they'll get 7 out of 8 seats instead of 7 out of 8 seats out of the 6 out of 8 that they currently have. So it's it's very misleading to put that in the language, and people, not politicians, campaign called it out and are now trying to challenge it in court.
Yeah, sounds about par for the course, depending on what state you're in. It's just, but this is why gerrymandering and stuff is so insidious. I mean, Independent Voter Project, we've always said, the Secretary of States who administer elections, why are they partisan in the first place? But that's a fight that might take several decades. But it just goes to show, like, the same thing happens, and they all point to each other. Well, you don't believe in democracy. No, you don't believe our party's better. Your party, they all do the same thing.
Yeah, I pointed this out in the article that California Democrats used the same tactic with Prop 50. We talked about this before, where they said that this was all about saving democracy. And in the ballot measure, they said that we support independent redistricting, in the same ballot measure that suspends an independent drawn map. So it's, as you said, both parties do this. And so, like, anyone who thinks that we're picking on one side or the other, we call out both here when they do this all the time.
I mean, remember, and right now there's some big going on in Texas. You got the faction of the Republican Party suing the Republican Secretary of State. And in that case, you have a Republican Secretary of State that's like, well, no, my job's to protect the process and the voters, not the party. So she's actually at odds with her own party in Texas right now. You have one faction of the Republican Party trying to close their primaries, and then you have Secretary of State Jane Nelson, the Republican, saying, no, primaries are taxpayer funded. They've always been open in Texas. What are you doing? I'm protecting the law. So it's just not, independent politics creates fascinating dynamics.
Seriously,
really
this discussion about ballot language gives me PTSD from 2018 when we had to put ranked choice voting on the ballot for a second time as part of the people's veto. And the Secretary of State, Matt Dunlop, was in charge of the ballot language at that time. And can I just read you guys what the question was on the ballot for question 1? Can you bear with me? Because also I want to. Okay, ready? So also shenanigan, I think, is the Irish word for hanky panky. All right, here's the question. Question 1 from June 12th, 2018, and somehow we won. Question 1. Do you want to reject the parts of a new law that would delay the use of ranked choice voting in the election of candidates for any state or federal office until 2022, and then retain the method only if the Constitution is amended by December 1st, 2021, to allow ranked choice voting for candidates in state elections?
Yeah, I feel like any question, it starts off with, do you want to reject the law? It's just like giving you the inverse and confusing you from the very first.
From the very first. And that's the stuff they do, and both sides do it. And so whenever you see like a self-righteous, politician standing up, oh, these Republicans are doing that, they all do the same thing. I mean, we had something years ago. Remember when Bernie was running, and they basically just threw out all the delegates for Bernie because at that time, the party was trying to make sure that Hillary Clinton, I should say the party establishment was trying to make sure Hillary Clinton won. And like, they literally argued in court. Like, once they go in the courtroom, they tell the judge, like, our votes don't actually matter. Like, it doesn't matter what anybody voted in the primary, right? Like, our party's rules are not subject to state review. We can change them at any time. And you know what? The judge agreed. This is why the Independent Voter Project is so passionate about issues like nonpartisan primaries, because the parties will literally go in court. And go look it up. Go look it up. They go into court, and when they don't like the outcome, they just change it because they call a meeting and change the rules. And the judges agree. They go, yeah, you're a private organization. Like, I can't go tell McDonald's that, we don't like the CEO you hired, right? That's not how it works. That's literally how the process actually works. And, it comes back to people go, oh, I wonder why the parties don't seem to represent me. Well, as they argue in court, that's not their job.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Sean.
I was going to say, it's always a subject of concern for nonpartisan reformers anywhere when they want to put election reform on the ballot, that they're always going to have to fight for better ballot language or ballot summary, because the people who are in charge of this are party loyalists. They're incentivized by the system to put their party first. And that's exactly what they do a lot of times when they write this language to be prejudicial against the ballot measure or to try to manipulate the way voters see something in order to protect their own manipulation of the system.
Yep. Exactly right.
So moving right along from Missouri, we can go to West Virginia. The West Virginia Republican Party, Sean writes about this week, decided not to take a vote to reopen their primaries. And, I think, Sean, you said that West Virginia, basically the GOP voted to close their primaries a few years ago.
Yeah, so a few years back, they held a vote in one of their statewide meetings to close the primaries, which under state law is their right to do. The parties can choose whether or not to keep their primaries open to independent voters or close them. And so the Republican Party voted to close them. And then this past weekend, they held another, or they had another, like what their winter meeting. And someone had offered this proposal to reopen the primaries, but it never got to a vote. And so in a state like West Virginia, people who know it know that it's very solidly Republican. Its state legislature has a supermajority, that's GOP. Many, if not all of their members of Congress are Republicans. For a while, the one Democrat they had was Joe Manchin, and he changed his party registration. Talk about someone who knows what it's like to be ostracized by his party. He changed his registration to independent. And so now he knows what it's like to be on this side of the fence and be left out of primaries. And so back in 2025, you started to hear him really come out for open primaries. And I assume, and I'm sure he's going to continue to do that, especially as he's becoming more involved in reform groups and better election groups.
Well, now that Joe Manchin's an independent, I started reading his book, and I'm in the middle of it right now. But I share something in common that I want to share with Joe Manchin, is that when he was 10 years old, apparently, according to his book, his mom let him drive the car to park it in the garage, and you accidentally hit the garage, right? I was like, this guy's an independent. He's passionate about his politics. We share a lot in common. In fact, we do, because my mother let me park the car when I was in Little League. Not only did she let me park the car, I was still wearing my cleats from the baseball field. And nonetheless, I also hit something in my garage. So, I mean, we're basically like the same guy.
Driving with cleats, not the best.
No,
not going to work out well.
Not very smart, but we share that in common. But in all seriousness, like Joe Manchin's somebody that, is an very interesting guy, survived politics, being on what in his state would be considered, the wrong party for a long time. But so he comes from a very interesting perspective. It just highlights like how divisive all of our politics has come, and we're like, both parties want to claim ownership to states. But when you actually go look at the voters, the disparities really aren't that great. Right? Mm-hmm. It's just okay, party gets control, and then they try to take ownership of it. Like they own the state. This is my red state. That's your blue state.
Right.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Well, and I think this is why, pushing for nonpartisan reform is so important. You look at a state like Alaska, Cara, you mentioned it earlier that we were going to talk about Mary Peltola running for the Senate. Mary Peltola has already won an election, a statewide election for the U.S. House race for a single term. And that is a state where under a nonpartisan system, you've seen elections become less partisan. You've seen more cross-partisan support in the legislature under that system. Again, Mary Peltola was elected once as a Democrat, the first Democrat since the 50s, I think, to be elected to a statewide or to a congressional seat in Alaska, which there's only one congressional U.S. House seat there. But now, running for U.S. Senate, she stands a good chance because under the ranked choice voting system, a nonpartisan primary system, you see the nuances of that electorate there in the state.
And that's why they're trying to appeal it again.
Yeah. Right? They'll keep trying to repeal it until it happens. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
And Mary Peltola, also, just to say, she was elected twice. Because remember, she was elected first to fill Young's seat after he died. They had a special. And then she was elected again. So she's actually been elected twice statewide under this system. And then she was defeated, of course, under the system in 2024. But yeah, she's got a real chance at that. And although I did read that Senator Lisa Murkowski, who endorsed Peltola last time, even though she's a Democrat, Murkowski is a Republican, is actually going to stick. Murkowski's going to stick with Sullivan this time around.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting. You just see how much the dynamics, the incentive change. Look at Idaho, right? You have a 27% or 28% turnout in the primary, right? So when you have these districts and everything that are gerrymandered, or you have a majority in the state, the primary becomes important. So you can imagine why the Republican Party in Idaho goes, well, if we just close it, then we control it completely, right? We get to select who's going to win. We put all our resources behind the one we want to win, and voters don't really matter, right? That's what's going on. And that's exactly why they're going to try to repeal in Alaska. This is a state that in their eyes, this is a red state. Why does a Democrat even have a shot, right? Because if you look at through the partisan lens of this is our state, that creates their frustration, right? Why did she win, right? The whole point is the nonpartisan primary, right? It could very well be a Republican that wins, but it's got to be a Democrat or a Republican that in a nonpartisan primary can advance, right? So which means they have to talk to enough of the electorate in general, not just not enough of the people in their party to win, which is the fundamental difference. So you're going to always have the extremes that see the world through blue or red glasses oppose these type of measures because they don't, right? If you just want somebody to be elected that agrees with you on everything, you're not going to like a nonpartisan primary.
And when the parties get to claim a state as their state, whether they want to claim it a red state or claim it as a blue state, it ignores the fact, say in Alaska, Republicans want to claim that state as theirs, but 60% of the electorate is registered independent. The major parties actually make up a minority in the state, and you can say that for about a dozen states right now, including Colorado most recently. That Colorado has long been considered a purple state. Democrats want to claim it for their own because they have such a majority in the legislature, but now independents make up a majority. And
did you see the Gallup poll? It's the Gallup has been doing, it's a famous, credible polling apparatus that's been polling the American people for, decades and decades. And I think it was yesterday or the day before, there's 45% of Americans are now identify as independents. And that's the highest it's ever been on record for Gallup. So that's pretty extraordinary.
Yeah, and as long as so as that happens, it actually there's a natural consequence that you're going to have a more partisan legislature if the election structure and the incentives are to be very partisan, right? Because every time somebody says, I'm tired of it, a pox on both parties, and they leave, right? Well, now they cannot vote. Like, look at New Jersey. 50% of the vote, that's even higher than Gallup, 50%. That not just people that went to the registrar's office said, I want to vote. I want to be a registered voter. At the same time, select the box. I don't want to join either party. Right?
You're essentially saying I'm not going to really vote.
Because then you combine it with gerrymandering and closed primaries in a state that has like closer to a 10% turnout. So, I was talking about Idaho at 27, like that's low. Take New Jersey, it's around 10%. You realize how few voters are actually really calling the shots. So then you step back and go, why do we have all these, very ideological, politicians who probably don't even believe half the things they're saying, right? It's because that's the incentive structure. We literally designed it.
Do you think as a byproduct of this, the parties, they don't really feel the need to actually increase voter engagement in general? Like, do you think if more people, if the turnout, let's say all of a sudden next 5 years goes up by 20, 30%, would that lead more people to become more partisan, or would they probably vote for reforms that bring the system closer to what we want?
I think people would, but if you're thinking about folks hanging on to power, you have power, you want to keep it, right? Why would you want anything that requires you to talk to more people and convince more people, right? So both sides have created this atmosphere that it's a divide and conquer strategy, right? Like, I can find my Democrats, I can find my Republicans, and then let's drive them out. Talking to people, about nuances and who may agree with me or may not, that takes a lot of time and money,
especially
on
in
both
today's
sides.
short
Right.
form world.
At the end of the day, it's an industry. I mean, Catherine Gell literally wrote the book on it, right? This is an industry. And that doesn't mean everybody in the industry is bad. Like, you take California, like, there are so many good legislators in California, right? Very diverse thought. I mean, there's conservative Democrats, there's some. Why? Because forget the national narrative, a bunch of BS, right? When you come to a state level, like, there's major problems in California, but there's actually a diversity of thought in the legislature and stuff. And I'd like to attribute some of that to the nonpartisan primary, right? Everything in life is more nuanced than it sounds. But the overarching issue is that we have an election process at a national level that incentivizes division.
And
That's
I
what it
think
does.
the interesting thing about the Gallup polling is that when you look at the historical trend, it used to be that every odd year independent ID would rise substantially. And then, to your point, because of how the system is designed to force people into two camps, you start to see that dip a little in midterms and then plummet in presidential elections. What I find
Yes.
interesting about the most recent Gallup poll is what you're seeing are two breaks from historical trends. One is that the younger generations of voters are not picking a party the older they get. So Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z coming in as the most independent, most likely to be independent, which is driving up the number of independents in the nation.
By far too.
Yeah. It's like 67% of Gen Z is independent or something like that. But the other historical trend is that because when you look in 2023, it went up to what used to be the record high, which was 43%. It stayed steady at 2024. It didn't drop again. And then now it's rising. So you're seeing this. People are catching on, and that may mean that this is a good opportunity for reformers to start taking advantage of voters' frustrations.
Well, for sure. But the problem is, of course, that our first past the post voting system, which forces us into one of two camps and doesn't sort of give us the freedom to choose independents. And independents aren't incentivized to run in closed systems that don't give them sort of an equal ability to win.
Well, like, even, I'm sorry to keep bringing it back to California, but we do have that, some of the shows in our survey, like NPPs, like, it's overwhelming. You ask them, do you want to keep the nonpartisan primary or go back to a traditional primary? It's like 95 to, 90, 95, 96%. And the rest are unsure, maybe because they didn't understand it. You take issues like campaign finance, right? There is one issue, the issue of immigration, that is even dividing independents. And, there's some very interesting crosstabs and all that stuff related to it. But the fact is, like, even in California, where we have nonpartisan primaries, and you haven't seen by registration the trend really go up. We can go into all the wonky details about why that is. It's just, it's fascinating because the discussion, the partisan nature of all these issues and stuff is just like tries to force voters to be in a camp. Like, no, you're in that camp. No, you're in this camp, right? And then nuance gets totally lost.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so do the issues where we mostly agree get totally lost, right? Because we're forced to choose between one or the other when sort of a little bit of both is what we can all agree on. So the consensus is there, but our system won't allow it. We talk about this all the time. And, in Nevada, there's sort of a unique thing going on, right, Sean? Basically, they're trying to enshrine the right to vote in the state constitution. Is that right?
Yeah, so I mean, and Chad can speak to this more too. One of the biggest legal challenges for the open primaries movement and the movement to adopt nonpartisan primaries and give and ensure that independents have equal voting rights is the assertion by the parties that since they're private organizations, they don't have to allow independent to vote in these primaries, even though they're taxpayer funded. And so what Nevada is doing is that there is an organization called Vote Nevada. They have an initiative coming up in 2026 that would add to the Voter Bill of Rights in their constitution. The Voter Bill of Rights was passed in 2020. It already includes that voters cannot be discriminated against based on certain social demographic traits and reasons. But the segment of that does not include political affiliation. And so in order to kind of added pressure for the legislature to pass some sort of open primaries, whether it's an open partisan system or a nonpartisan system like what's in California or Alaska. They want to enshrine in the state constitution that independent voters, all voters, regardless of party, have the right, equal voting rights to participate in all taxpayer-funded elections, including taxpayer-funded primaries.
I was just saying, so they're going to try to get at it a different way, which is really cool. Like, I love these reformers that are super creative. And when they come up against one obstacle, they try to figure out how, they keep going. And they realize that this change is granular change that needs to happen. And it's very cool that they're trying to do this in this new way in Nevada. Is it Nevada or Nevada?
Is it a tomato type thing? I mean,
I'm sure people that live there are probably more passionate about it, but I think it's a genius. I mean, just from a legal perspective, the elevator summary, if you take the seminal cases, California Democratic Party v. Jones closed an open primary because they said primaries belong to us, right? So then, right now, Independent Voter Project has gone to the Supreme Court twice. The only other organization I think really pushing this stuff is Open Primaries, and then we have our friend in Florida who just brought a case to the Supreme Court, right, challenging the right to participate, right? And our view is everybody deserves an equal right to vote. Our belief is under the existing Constitution, as an individual, you get your right as a citizen, you should have the right to vote at all integral stages of the publicly taxpayer-funded election process, right? But the court, literally in the Third Circuit, right now, the court's decision was, well, if you find yourself, drawn between a choice of joining a party or not participating, and you want to participate, simply join a party. That's the Third Circuit judge in the United States of America has said, when it comes to my fundamental right to vote in a primary election, just join a party. Now, I have serious First Amendment non-associational concerns with that decision. I believe ultimately, if the Supreme Court hears this case, they will decide it in our favor. But that could be 30, 40, 50 years or never. When, what Nevada's doing is brilliant because everybody, Republican, Democrat, you look at the language, should everybody have an equal right to vote in all stages of the public election process? Like 99% of people, of course. Right?
Yeah.
So what they're doing is codifying it so that a judge cannot tell you simply join a party. Right? Sorry.
Exactly.
No, your state, my state declaratively said don't just. So the First Amendment federal issue doesn't even come into play because state law has said we have even stronger protections when it comes to the right to vote. So it's a genius strategy. Bravo to Nevada. So what else? What do we got on our quick hit so we can move through the day? And
well, we have there's this special election going on, or actually it's going on, or it will be going on soon in Santa Clara County, and I think they had an election, and it cost $13 million. It's for like a county assessor's race.
Mm-hmm.
That election was like November 30th, and then. Yeah, why don't you explain, Sean?
Right. So the original election for this was on November 30th. It was after the current assessor, Larry Stone, had retired. And so they held an election on November 30th. It cost about $13.1 million to hold that election. And then because no candidate got over 50% of the vote, a runoff election was called for December 30th. So can you imagine what turnout was over a holiday week? So same cost, $13 million for one county race. And the
so
turnout,
together it's $26 million.
$26 million, and then turnout dropped by 53% in that election. So now ranked choice voting advocates are pointing this as an example of here are some of the systemic reasons why we need these type of reforms in order to save taxpayers a little money, but also ensure that, people get elected when the most people participate, especially in elections where, it doesn't have 50% less turnout than the previous election.
Hello.
Yeah.
It's like, $26 million. Do you know how many school lunches that buys? How many, it's how many first responders that
don't bring up not the daycare lunches.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I mean, talk about, We have whole other shows on waste, fraud, and abuse, and one is the amount we waste on elections that could have been done a lot better, done differently, and all that stuff.
I feel like you can uncover waste, fraud, and abuse in any government program ever, right? So it's always a great scapegoat when you're looking to pin something on someone.
That's right. That's right. Well, maybe we can cover those in some future shows, but we are wrapping up today. Remind everybody, we haven't really been visible on YouTube. Haven't really posted much. We're doing it more. So if you go to YouTube, please subscribe to us there as we build that. I mean, where we are very present is on Facebook, and then Ethan over here has been killing it on Instagram. That's really our main platforms. We'll get to TikTok. I don't know. We're still. I don't know. I'm old now.
Shout out to Ethan. We had 5 million eyes on our page last week, on our Facebook page last week.
Yeah.
And
we were rolling out a lot of clips on all that, everything going on in Minnesota, Minneapolis. We gotta get as many eyes on it as possible. So that's the goal.
That's right. And if you're not on our newsletter, make sure you get on it and go to our site. This is the largest poll ever. Like, it's 1,700, more than that, known NPP voters, independent voters in California. Some very interesting results. And what we found is that, none of the above is actually polling better than any of the Democratic candidates. So this is a very interesting dynamics. We really could end up in California with 2 Republicans on the ballot in November, right? That we should leave that for another story. But go check it out. We have a lot of the results posted. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram. Sean, thanks for joining us again. We're going to keep bringing Sean back because he's the encyclopedia of reform, and also our editor of IVN, holding up the show for almost 15 years now. And then we got Cara, who's been writing some very incredible stuff. We're happy to have you on the editorial team as well. Just wrote a great article in the cannabis space. I mean, talk about the law of good intentions. I think that's how your article starts off. But you have 2 legislators that are the authors of a bill in California. These are very well-intentioned, smart legislators, very well-respected. But are you really thinking out the natural consequence of what's going to happen policy-wise? Anyway, if you were interested in that story, go to IVN. Thanks for everybody for listening, for having us. I'm going to wrap it up. Ethan, our soothsayer, thank you for joining us again and killing it online.
Anytime, Chad. Love coming on here, talking to you guys. It's been great.
We just love listening to your voice. So thank you, everybody. We'll see you next time. This is the Independent Voter Podcast, sponsored by the Independent Voter Project and produced by Olas Media. Remember, you can always find the Independent Voter Podcast or the How It Really Works series at ivn.us. Follow and subscribe at olasmedia.com.
Olas Media.